All right, welcome back. We are now in this next section for the BEST training program. And this section and the whole module, in fact, this module and the next module are on the topic of mindset and behavior. And one of the things that we've been explaining up till now is that so many of the things that you want to do in your life, there's the real barriers that you face in life, but then there's also the barriers that you put on yourself, that they're in your mind. They're not so much outside, they have to do with how you think and how you behave, and sometimes those limitations are just as big or more than the limitations of real life. And so let's spend a little bit of time talking about mindset and behavior in this section. Okay. Okay, so I'd like you to spend just a moment and think about what is it that makes people successful. And you probably have your thoughts. You know, maybe you think that if people are very smart or if they're very aggressive in some way, or who knows. Everyone has some conception of what makes people successful. I want you to think about it looking at the diagram that's on this slide. So on this diagram, we have two axes. There's a vertical axis, and on that vertical axis, think of that as how technically smart you are. It's maybe your technical potential. In fact, it doesn't have to even be technical. It could be just whatever subject or discipline you're studying. So how smart and good are you, or how capable are you in finance or engineering or medicine or whatever it is that you study? That's on the vertical axis. And then there's another axis, and that's the horizontal axis. And on this one, think of your mindset and your behavior and kind of your psychology for being able to do new things. You could call it maybe like a psychology of innovation. Maybe you think of this a little bit like being street smart. So some people, they're very high on the vertical axis. That is, they're very book smart. They're very good in all the classrooms. They do their tests and they test very well. And they can be very successful. They graduate, they do well, they get good jobs. But they're usually successful in a certain narrow sense. People ask them to do a certain function, and they do that function well, and they're successful in that way. Then think about the people who are maybe not as strong in the book smart way, and they're strong in the street smart way. Now, what does that mean? Those people, they usually know how to connect with other people. They're very good listeners. They understand who to go to for what thing. They can usually influence people in better ways. Those people can also be very successful. They get successful in a different way because they make things happen through other people instead of directly doing it themselves. Now, imagine that you're a person who's strong in your subject area, but you could be stronger in the psychology and in the street smart way, being just a little bit stronger on the y-axis, moving from the right next to the top of the vertical axis, just moving over a little bit on the x-axis. That actually makes you stand out from everyone else who's also book smart. And when people get into their careers, when people in their real life jobs, when they're like this, those are the people that become the managers. Those are the people that become the directors. Those are the people that become the vice presidents. Those are the people who succeed inside the organization, not because they're a little bit more book smart than everyone else. They succeed because they're book smart, but they're also had a little bit extra on the x-axis. They had a little bit more of the street smart or the psychology capabilities. And the people who have both, that they're really strong in both, those are like your famous entrepreneurs. Those are like people like Steve Jobs or maybe Bill Gates or other people that you think, started something from nothing and somehow they were very visionary and they got lots of people to work with them, but they're also very smart technically. So whether you move a little bit over or whether we could help you move much farther over to be a combination of both, those are all factors that amplify your success, that make you just much more capable of doing well in the world. Our philosophy in working with people over time has been that universities are very good at helping people, first of all, selecting people who are going to be very strong on this vertical axis. That is, they are book smart or they have high potential in being able to learn academic topics. But universities have not so far done so much to educate people on the other axis, the one that improves their psychology for innovation, for adaptation, their psychology for doing new things. And our goal has become to take the people who are academically strong and to give them also some training or some development, basically develop them as people so that they can be both, so that they can be stronger also in the street smart or the psychology of innovation direction. So you might ask yourself, what does it mean? What are those behaviors that people have that push them farther to the right on the x-axis? That is, what makes them stronger in the psychology of innovation area? Well, one of those things is called having a wide comfort zone. That means that you are willing to work on things that you don't already think you're an expert in. You don't have to study it for a long time and feel very confident in it. You're willing to say, oh, let me try it. I'll figure it out while we're trying to do it. It's just you're relaxed. You're comfortable doing things that you don't already know, okay? There's another behavior, and that is called being able to generate trust. That means that you can get people to trust you and that you can learn to trust other people relatively quickly. Instead of spending months before you know them well enough to share information with them, you might make that decision much quicker, maybe within a day, within a week, quickly. It doesn't mean that you have to completely trust everyone, but it means that you have to start with the idea that you trust people until you have some reason to believe that you don't. Instead of the other way around, which is you don't trust anyone until such a long time that finally they've convinced you that they could be trusted by you. So just that little change in how you think can get you on your way to communicating more quickly with other people. And that brings us to another important characteristic or behavior of people who have these psychology skills, and that is being a good connector. That means that they talk to a lot of different kinds of people and that they can take ideas from one person and translate it and give it to another person who that first person would not normally be talking to. You, because you can lower your social barriers, you can talk to different kinds of people even if they're not like you. That lets you connect people and connect information. And it's a really important skill in being able to innovate and to being able to create new things. Lots of times, people spend all their time talking to people who are just like themselves. And that's because we all have these social barriers. We all are naturally interested to talk to the people who agree with us, the ones who are the most similar. But if you think about it, and you understand this, those are the people who can provide you the least amount of helpful information. So we spend our time talking to the people, we want to spend our time talking to the people who can help us the least, and we tend to spend the least amount of time talking with the people who have new information, the ones who could help us the most. And that's all because we have these social barriers. So if you can lower your social barriers and talk to the people who don't necessarily think all the things that you think and have all the same background that you have, then you can learn new things and you can be a better connector. And this is a big advantage in your psychology and in your overall capability. Okay, there's another topic, another type of behavior, and that is called inductive learning. This means that you learn things not necessarily from a book. You don't have to be told everything like a proof, like a list of things in a recipe. You can figure them out yourself by watching the environment, making guesses of how you think things work, and then just validating them and figuring out that it actually works that way. You used to do this anyway when you were a kid. For example, how do you know that you shouldn't touch the stove when it's hot, when it's red? Did you read a manual to figure out that you shouldn't touch the stove when it's red? Of course not. You either saw someone else touch it and learned that you shouldn't do that because you can get burned, or maybe you did it yourself just a little bit and learned that you shouldn't do it. Somehow you pick that information up without actually being specifically told or reading it from a book. But as you go through school, you start to think all information comes to you from a book or being told or by a formula. And if you get programmed to think that that's where you get all your information, then you stop learning from the environment around you, and that's really limiting. So if you can get back to figuring out what's going on in the world by making your own guesses, then you're effectively using inductive learning. Okay, and there's one more of these mindsets and behaviors which can be very helpful to you, and that is just self-awareness and emotional intelligence. Now, this is a topic which everybody can work on, and it just means, do you really know your own emotions? Can you control your own emotions? And so that's the awareness. Are you aware, and then can you control them? And then if you can, then you have a chance of being able to actually control and be aware of emotions in groups of people. And so you can help your team have a positive attitude. You can help others have a positive attitude about something or be very constructive about something. You can't do that if you yourself are not in control or aware of how you're acting. And so it's just a thing that you practice by being aware. You observe how things went every day. You think about what your emotion was, and you are aware of whether you controlled it or it controlled you in different situations. And over time, you get better at it. There's obviously more that you could look this up on your own, and you could do more. Just look up the idea of emotional intelligence, and if you want to, you could study that on your own. Okay, so now I want to take a moment and introduce you a little bit more to the idea of comfort zone. So this is a scale. If you look at this slide, there's a scale. And on this scale, there's two categories. One category is how comfortable you are with decisions in your personal life. That means things that are in your social life, that is where you go for restaurants and what you do at home and how you enjoy yourself. And then there's the decisions that you make in your work life. The personal decisions, we're going to call them at a level P1, P2, P3, or P4. P1 means that you need a lot of information before you make a decision. You want to know everything about the restaurant that you're going to. You check all the ratings. You want to know from other people how good it was. And in fact, you probably don't try very many new things because you need so much extra information, and you generally do the same thing all the time. P4 would be on the other end of that spectrum. You're willing to try all kinds of things, and it doesn't matter. There's a lot of uncertainty in what you might do, but it's fine with you. You go, you see how the experience was. If there's a problem, you think you can handle it, but you don't need lots of extra information. You'll just try it. The same thing can happen at work or at school or in your professional life. W1 means that you need to analyze everything before you make a decision. You study everything, you know all the trade-offs, you know how risky it's going to be, you know what could go wrong. W4, on the other hand, is you just need a little bit of information. Maybe you just have some idea that this could be good or bad, but you don't know all the details, but you're willing to try it. And once you get into it, you have confidence that whatever problems come up, you'll solve it at that time. You can take care of the situation. You don't need to think it all out in advance. So I'm going to ask you to analyze yourself. On the personal level, are you a P1? Are you a P2, P3, or P4? P1 again means on all your personal decisions, do you need lots of information and do you always do exactly the same thing? Or P4, you don't need much information and you're always experimenting with all kinds of new things in your social life. And so maybe you're a P2 or a P3. You tell me. And then on the W scale, are you a W1? You want to study everything in advance. You need all the information before you make a decision. Or are you a W4, which is, well, let's try it. I think it could work. We'll do an experiment. And then if it goes well, great. If there's a problem, you'll fix it while you're working on it. But from your gut, you just had a good sense that this would be worth trying, and then you start to try it. Okay, and so you could be a W1, W2, W3, W4. So write down for yourself. Take a moment and think about this, and write down for yourself. Am I a P2, W3? Are you a P4, W1? Right, that would be you're really risky with your personal decisions, but very, very safe with your work decisions. You could be a P1, W4, which means you're very conservative with your social decisions and you're very risky with your work-life decisions. Okay, you think about it. One point of communicating this is that you don't have to be the same in both. You can be one level on your personal life and you can be another level in your professional life. But to start, let's just have some self-awareness and figure out where you are in this scale, in this comfort zone scale. Okay, so now we've been talking about mindset and behavior, and I've introduced you to the fundamental or the basic ideas of mindset and behavior. I want you to now self-reflect. This is part of the course. You have to think about these things for yourself. Now, my first question to you, and you should think through this and you should write it down, which of the mindsets and behaviors that we've talked about do you already feel you are strong, and which ones would be the most helpful to you if you were to make them better? Like, where do you think you're weak, and which ones, if you worked on them, do you think you would be better? And that includes, number one, do you think that you need a wider comfort zone? Are you too conservative in how much risk you can take in personal or professional decisions? Number two, how quickly do you generate trust with other people? Number three, are you a good connector, and do you have low enough social barriers that you can talk to different kinds of people? Number four, do you try to learn everything from a book? I'm talking about inductive learning. Or are you able to look at the environment and make your own guesses about how the world around you is working? And number five, self-awareness and emotional intelligence. Are you really in control of yourself, aware of yourself, and aware of emotions, controlling? Are you able to control, not just be aware, but are you able to control the emotions that you have? Okay, so take a little bit of time and write it down. You can write it down in a paragraph or in some text, and you can enter it back into the course assignment. But the basic goal is write down what you can do to develop these mindsets. In other words, which ones are you strong and weak, and what can you do to develop the ones that you think would be most helpful to you. Okay. We'll just take a break for a second. Okay, we're back. You've had a chance to evaluate yourself and think about which mindsets and behaviors you are strong and weak in, and you've started to think about how you might strengthen the ones which you think can be helpful to you. I want you to think now, how should you interpret what's going on with your mindset, with your behaviors, and real life? How does all of this work? So take a look at this slide. This slide explains how these things are related to each other. What happens is that first you have a set of mindset. You have a mindset, and this is the programming that's inside your head. Nobody else can see it. Only you have this visibility into how you think. So you will, because of the way that you think, it will interpret itself in behaviors, and people will see those behaviors. They don't actually see what you're thinking, but they do see how you act. And the mindset creates the behaviors that you have. And then, because you behave in a good way or a bad way, you end up having good results or bad results. And if you have good behaviors, you'll have good results over time, and then that will reinforce a positive mindset, and then that you'll get more good behaviors, and then you'll have good results, and that circle will continue. The opposite can happen too. You have a negative mindset, it translates into negative behaviors, and that will turn into things going wrong the way you didn't expect them to, and it'll reinforce your negative mindsets, and that circle can continue. So first of all, let's just talk a little bit about what to do about this. There are some mindsets that we talked about, and you can just look at them on the slide. I'll tell you one that we didn't talk about, and I think it's really an important one, is called intrinsic self-worth. This means, can you realize that you have value as a person without someone else telling it to you? Do you need other people to say, you did a good job, that was great, you're a smart person? Do you need that from other people? Or can you, on your own, just feel that you have value? You don't need other people to tell you. If you need it from other people all the time, it's a weakness. And then you're dependent on other people to tell that to you. So if you want to just think about all the mindsets that we talked about before, and just add this one to the list, and start thinking about how you can have, and maybe you don't need this. Some people have too much of it. Some people are overconfident, but many people are not. And they actually could just use a little bit more of this idea of intrinsic self-worth. So you figure out whether that's one that you would add to the list. Okay, so let's suppose you have these proper mindsets and behaviors. Like I said, they will translate into some behaviors. The mindsets will translate into some behaviors. Some behaviors are just good. They're good behaviors in every situation. So, for example, one positive behavior is, if you're confident with yourself, then what do you do with that confidence? Do you use that confidence to make other people feel safe? Or do you use that confidence to make other people feel uncomfortable? Do you use it to show that you're smarter or better than them? If you use it in the right way, you can use your confidence, your intrinsic self-value, to make people feel safe and good around you. Then what will happen is, later on, those people will help you in other ways that you don't even realize or didn't even ask for. But if you're using your confidence to make people feel less or feel uncomfortable in some way, then what will happen? They will basically not want to help you at other times. And all of this will translate into some results, which will be negative or positive depending on how you've been behaving. And that will reinforce whatever mindset you have. Okay, so there's some of these behaviors which it doesn't really matter what you're doing, they're just good to have. So take a look at the slide. There's these sets of behaviors. And then some of these behaviors which we've been talking about, the generating trust, the wide comfort zones, helping people who didn't even need help, which didn't help you first. That's called pay it forward. All of those mindsets, the idea of diversity is value, meaning the people who are not like you are actually valuable. All of those behaviors are ones that are also good for being innovative. So there's good behaviors just to be a good person and to do well, and then there's behaviors, a subset of those, which are particularly important if you want to invent new things, if you want to be innovative overall, if you want to be adaptive, if you want to be a good leader, they all support that. So take a look at those behaviors again, and all I'm trying to do with this part of the video is explain to you, you have a mindset that will support your behaviors. If you try to act in a way that is not consistent with your mindset, it will come across as an insecurity, because what's going in your mind isn't matching how you're acting in real life, and people will notice that. So you have the right mental thinking, then you have the behaviors, that translates into positive things in life, and that will reinforce itself. Okay, now one last thing that I got to tell you in this section is the mindset you can fix by the logic inside your head. You can say, that's a good way to think about things. Behaviors you cannot fix only by knowing that that's a good behavior. Behaviors you have to fix by just practicing them, by faking it, even if it's uncomfortable to you. If it's uncomfortable to you to be nice to lots of people, you can't just say, oh, well, I should be nice to people. You have to try being nice to people, even if it's uncomfortable, until you naturally become like that. Okay? So think about it like exercise. Maybe you know that you should do exercise more often, but just knowing it doesn't mean that you will do it. If you want to exercise more often, a better approach would be every day, even if it's for 5 minutes, I'm going to exercise. I'm just going to be in the habit of doing it. And after a while, you start to do it more often. So behaviors you fix by just faking it, by doing it in a small way, by forcing yourself until they become natural to you. And then your mind will know it logically, your body and yourself will do it automatically because you've been doing it in that way, and then it all comes together. Okay, think about all these things that are on this slide, but in the first part, what we talked about was what are the behaviors and mindsets. In this part, if you want to fix something, this is the discussion about how you actually fix it. All right, welcome back. In the last section, we started off talking about what are mindsets and behaviors. That was an introduction to it. This is mindset and behavior 2, and we're going to go a little bit deeper into this topic of the psychology of innovation. All right. So let's start with this question. How can you expand the areas which you're comfortable with? How can you expand your comfort in new things that you'd like to be able to do? So to start this discussion, I'm going to give you an example. If you look at this slide, on the left-hand side is a picture of Mary. And I'm showing Mary here to be an introvert. She's a person who does not like to speak to a lot of people. She doesn't like to speak in front of a large audience per se. But she knows that a week from now, she has to make a presentation that's in front of a lot of people. And so it's uncomfortable to her. All right. So she's by herself. She'd rather be by herself, and she's planning for this. And she's planning for this, and she's going to, eventually give her presentation. Now, she's got two choices. She can either be completely honest with herself, and she can say, I was never good at public speaking. I'm really an introvert. That's really just not me. And just leave it there. And the problem with that is that she's not going to end up pushing herself in any way. She's not going to develop this new capability. And she's not going to fulfill all the things that she could do well. So by just completely admitting to herself what her problem is and not doing anything else, she's not expanding her comfort zone. Okay, now she's got another choice. In her other choice, she can tell herself, oh, I can do that. I'm actually an introvert. I'm really capable of doing all these things. Okay, we call that self-affirmation. You can look in the mirror every day and you can say, I'm very courageous, I'm strong, so forth, right? And maybe it's true, but maybe it's not fully true. And the problem with doing that is you can do it for a little bit, but your mind knows when you're not being completely honest with yourself. So if you do that too much, you can project a little bit, but there will be a difference in what you're telling yourself and what you truly believe. And once your mind starts to evaluate that difference, that will turn into a different kind of insecurity. In fact, your brain does not like the story that you are not good. So when you tell yourself, oh, I'm really courageous, but you know that that's not how you acted in the past, your brain feels like you lied to yourself, and your brain feels like you're really saying you don't like the version of yourself that you were. And all of those cause you a different set of problems. So you see, you've got these two choices. One, stay in the middle of your comfort zone and don't grow, or lie to yourself, and maybe you can push yourself out, but it might not really be genuinely you. And a lot of people get stuck between these two things. So what should you do? Fortunately, there is a way to get past this. All right, so on this next slide, I want to talk about what actually makes sense for people. How do they overcome, how do they expand their comfort zone without getting themselves into a situation where they're no longer genuine with themselves? Okay, so what you should do, and what Mary could do, is, first of all, be self-aware. You can know that you're an introvert. You can know that you're not, in the past, have not been good at public speaking. You can be in touch with all of this and be comfortable with it. There's nothing wrong with it. And in fact, if you really think about it, you can look at all of the positive aspects of whatever comes with that. So with everything that's a weakness, there's always a positive part of that. And so maybe you might say, okay, I'm an introvert, but that means that I actually think more than other people. While other people are talking, I'm thinking more. And you can appreciate the parts that are really good from whatever you think are this weakness. And you can build on that. That's a strength for you, actually. Okay. At the same time, while you are aware that you are an introvert and that public speaking is not the most natural thing for you, you can play a game where you can mimic. You can be aware of yourself and you can play the game that you're pretending to be a little bit like a person who's an extrovert. So you didn't lie to yourself, you didn't get lost, you didn't fool yourself into thinking I'm an extrovert when you're not. You're aware of who you are, but then you start to have the actions. You make yourself have the actions because you're playing, mimicking, faking the behavior of a person that you're not. But since you know you're faking it, since you know it's not your natural self, you're not lying to yourself. And as you do this, as you fake that behavior, as you mimic that behavior, it slowly becomes more and more natural to you. And at some point, you'll actually realize, well, maybe I'm not that introverted. And maybe I actually can do some of these things because I've been doing them. Okay? And this is a very powerful technique. It's right in the middle of convincing yourself you can do things that you can't do and not doing things because you think you can't do them. It's the way that you get from one to the other. So think about this. It's like I said, it's a very powerful idea. And if you internalize this, and I think you should just take some time and think about it, you'll see that you can do a lot of things with this that you didn't think that you could really do before. Okay, so this takes me to another topic, or actually extending this topic of comfort zone. Comfort zone is really at the core of a lot of these things. So you want to be able to step out of your comfort zone because that's what lets you do all of these things. And I just showed you in the last slide that there's ways to do that, that you can get from staying in the middle of your comfort zone to getting to the edge of your comfort zone and doing new things without going way too far that you get yourself in trouble in that process. So you really have these three choices. You can either stay right in the middle of your comfort zone. The problem with that is you don't actually ever learn anything new. You just stay the way that you are, and by not learning new things, you're not able to do new things. Okay. You can, on the other extreme, push yourself very far out of your comfort zone. But that has a problem. That means that you're basically in an area mostly dominated by fear. You're so far away from what you're comfortable with that fear takes over and you're not able to learn anything, you're really more frozen. You're just stuck in this very uncomfortable situation. What you want to be is in the middle of these two. You don't want to be in the panic zone. You don't want to be in the comfort zone. You want to be in a zone where you're learning. And the last conversation that we had about Mary and learning to present in a natural way, getting to a learning area, not staying in the comfort zone, and not being completely panicked, that's your path. That's how you do it. And the reason why this is so important is that research has shown that people who are entrepreneurs and people who are innovators, they are people who live their entire lives in the learning zone. They don't live their lives in the middle of their comfort zone. They're always at the edge. They're always, therefore, in a little bit of an uncomfortable spot, but not very uncomfortable. And in this way, they are always learning new things. And over time, they learn at a much faster pace than everyone else. And over time, that difference between how fast other people are learning and how fast they are learning, that difference has become great. So they end up knowing a lot more things, and they end up becoming much more capable. And it all just comes from always being at the edge of the comfort zone, always pushing it just a little bit farther so that you're not stuck right in the middle of what you already know. Okay, so it's time to do one more reflection assignment. And this time, what I'd like you to do is think about what area or behavior would you like to develop. And now that we've talked about the ways that you can get into a farther part away from the middle of your comfort zone, what technique can you use to grow in that way? What would you do yourself? How will you think about it? And I want you to think through this, and I want you to write it down, and this is part of the assignment of this class at this stage. Welcome back. We've been talking about mindset and behavior for a little while in this section, and now we're at the end of this section, and there's one more thing that we need to talk about, and that is the topic of what motivates you, what motivates other people, and what motivates you. All right? So there's a lot of things that you would consider external motivations. Those are that you might get a reward from someone else if you do something, or something might go wrong, and then you just have to do it. That's a type of motivation, but that's not an internal motivation. That's a motivation that's caused by other people who are around you. Now, there are other motivations which are very important, and in fact, they're actually more important. And I want to explain this idea of motivation in the concept of adversity. Okay, so first of all, what is adversity? Adversity is that you have something that's not quite a disadvantage, but you have something that is hard for you to overcome. Maybe it's unfair or in some way. It could be that other people have more money than you, or they came from a kind of family where they can do things that you couldn't do, or there's something that is which you perceive as some sort of challenge that you have to overcome, or it's something that limits you. It's an adversity. It could be a learning disability. For example, maybe you have more trouble with a certain subject area, or there's something that you just find makes it challenging for you to do things. Now, what I want you to think about is, and you could think for a second what adversity you have also. People have adversities. I want you to think whether adversity to you, or even that one, is an advantage to you, or is it a disadvantage to you? Okay? So let me give you an example. Something that you could consider to be an adversity would be a learning disability like dyslexia. You know, people who have dyslexia, they switch the order of letters when they read them. So they have a lot of trouble actually reading normal sentences or, you know, just reading. It turns out that people who are dyslexic are overrepresented. That means there's more of them than you would expect in two populations. One population is in people who are in the prison population. Okay? So people who are in prison, there's on average more people who are dyslexic than in the normal population. The other population, where there are more people who are dyslexic than in the rest of the population, is CEOs of major corporations. Now think about this. This disadvantage, this adversity, that would be a better word, this barrier, okay, how is it that in some people it is part of a factor that led them to fall into lower tiers of society and eventually into prison? And in other people, the same learning disability seemed to contribute to becoming the CEO and the top of the company where they work. They become the head of the whole thing. All right? So that has to do with how a person thinks. It goes back to mindset. If a person thinks of adversity as a disadvantage, if they think, well, I just don't have what other people have, I cannot do as well as other people, then they give up in a way. And then they say, well, since I can't do it, it's only natural that I don't have as many resources, it's only natural I couldn't get a good job, and it just goes downhill from there, and maybe they committed some crime or whatever happened, and they ended up in prison. On the other hand, some people say, I have this learning disability, and because I cannot read as well as other people, I actually have to try harder. I have to try harder than other people just to stay with them. So if I can't read as well, I'm going to figuring out by talking to other people or by getting the information in some other way, or one way or the other, I have to overcome this issue. And to them, adversity, the dyslexia, actually turned into the advantage. Because they felt they had to try harder, they were actually able to succeed over other people, and they end up overrepresented in the CEO population. More CEOs have this issue than in the normal population. So from this point of view, I want you to think about how you think about it. Are you going to think about it, whatever challenge you have, are you going to think about it as a disadvantage? And if you do, the problem is that promotes something called entitlement. That makes you think, I should have something and I didn't get it, and it's not fair, and it's basically a negative way of thinking. The other way that you can think about it is that you can think of it as an advantage. I am going to have to work harder because I have this barrier to overcome, and in a strange way, it actually becomes your strength. It gives you an emotion, and it gives you will and desire to accomplish that other people actually don't have. All right? So let me kind of be clear about this. People who have lots and lots of things and they got everything that they wanted or really needed in life, they're actually missing this. They're missing that adversity. And so what drives them, they actually don't have it. And the person who has some challenges to overcome and realizes that they have to overcome these challenges, they have an emotional drive that those people don't have. In a strange way, it is this thing that you might call a disadvantage is actually an advantage. And it's all how you think about it. So, this is the final reflection assignment for this part of the course, the mindset and behavior section. I want you to think, first of all, what adversities did you have to overcome? And list them, write them down. What are those things? And now I want you to think, do you realize how those things are, those adversities, how they are also the sources of your strengths? So write this down in a short reflection. You'll see that everything that you think could be thought of in a negative way can also be thought of as a positive strength. And as you internalize this, first understand it, write it down, and make that part of your assignment, for this course. Overall, by thinking through the mindsets, what you can do, and how you think about things like adversity, this will collectively do a great deal for what you can achieve, what you can achieve because of the psychology that you have that drives you and makes you able to do these things.